In this video, we're going to explore something that goes beyond statistics, beyond personal stories. We'll uncover how racial profiling hurts everyone, not just those directly affected. From the innocent lives disrupted to the communities left shattered, the ripple effects are far-reaching. Why should we care about racial profiling if it doesn't directly impact us? Because at its core, this issue goes beyond race. It goes to the heart of what we all want: justice, equality, and a society where everyone can feel safe, heard, and valued. It's an issue that affects the very principles of fairness and equality that hold our communities together. Stay with us as we dive deeper into why racial profiling isn't just a problem for those who experience it, but a problem for society as a whole. Together, we'll explore the ways we can all fight to stop it, and why it's up to all of us to make that change. Now, here's the big question. How do we break free from this cycle? How do we build a society that uplifts everyone, not just some? Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why racial profiling is a problem for all of us and what we can do to fight back together. Racial profiling is not a new phenomenon. It's been embedded in our systems for generations. But what exactly does it mean? At its core, racial profiling is a practice of targeting someone based solely on their race, ethnicity, or physical appearance, not their behavior, actions, or any actual reason. It's the idea that simply by looking a certain way, you're a suspect, a threat, or out of place. Whether it's the color of your skin, your hair texture, or the clothes you wear, racial profiling assumes that someone's identity can define their intentions, their actions, and ultimately their worth. The problem? This assumption doesn't just harm the individual. It has a far-reaching impact, extending across entire systems, entire communities, and even shaping entire societal dynamics. Let's take a closer look at how racial profiling manifests in everyday life. It's not just about police interactions, although that's often where we see it most dramatically. Racial profiling can happen anywhere, in your local store, in schools, and even during everyday encounters on the street. Imagine you're driving home after a long day, feeling tired, and all of a sudden, you're pulled over. The officer didn't see you speeding or breaking any laws, but still you're stopped. Why? Because you fit a profile. Maybe you're a black man in an affluent neighborhood, or maybe you're a Latino woman in a predominantly white area. Your appearance alone, nothing more, was enough to raise suspicion. It's frustrating, it's painful, and it's damaging. The officer may let you go, but the emotional toll is much deeper. That feeling of being seen as a threat, simply for existing, can stick with you far beyond the encounter. And this happens all too often. But here's the thing. It's not just the individuals being targeted who suffer. The impact of racial profiling is much broader. It hurts entire communities. Imagine living in a neighborhood where people constantly feel the need to look over their shoulder, wondering if they'll be the next person stopped. Or think about a community where people of color begin to lose trust in the very institutions that are meant to protect them. This culture of profiling creates a deep sense of fear, not just for the people being stopped, but for their families and their neighbors as well. Fear turns into distrust. Mistrust between communities and law enforcement, mistrust between community members, and eventually mistrust within themselves. When you're always looking over your shoulder, it starts to feel like you don't belong anywhere, like you're always a step away from being wrongly accused, even when you've done nothing wrong. That emotional toll is deep, and its effects are long-lasting. When people feel like they're being unfairly judged based on their appearance, their very sense of belonging starts to erode. It begins to feel like the world is divided into us and them. People of color are often made to feel like they're outsiders, like they are perpetually under suspicion. This kind of constant pressure impacts mental health, anxiety, depression, fear. It can disrupt families, communities, and the social fabric that binds people together. Now, think about how that same fear and mistrust spreads through society. Racial profiling doesn't just stay contained within individual interactions. It ripples outward, spreading through the very fabric of society. Every time someone is targeted, it's like adding another brick to a wall of division and distrust. It affects the way communities view law enforcement, the justice system, and even one another. When one group is constantly subjected to these unwarranted, discriminatory actions, it creates an atmosphere of alienation. Communities of color, especially Black and Latino communities, begin to view the police not as protectors, but as a force of oppression. And the unfortunate reality is that this sentiment is often justified. When you've been targeted by the system that's supposed to protect you over and over again, it's hard not to internalize that fear. But this fear is contagious. It doesn't just stay within one community. It spreads, creating an atmosphere of generalized suspicion. When people see others being treated unfairly, they begin to question, if it could happen to them, could it happen to me? Even those who have never been the victim of racial profiling begin to feel the unease. The mere knowledge that racial profiling exists creates a widespread societal fear that holds us all back from achieving true unity, equality, and trust in one another. And while we often focus on the personal cost, the lost jobs, broken reputations, fractured families, the larger societal impact is even more profound. Racial profiling breeds a culture of division, and division makes change more difficult. When communities are divided, it becomes harder to work together, to engage in the types of conversations and cooperation necessary for true reform. When we are pitted against one another, how can we unite to demand a justice system that works for everyone? Racial profiling doesn't just hurt the individual or a community. It harms society itself. It hinders progress. It keeps us stuck in a loop of mistrust, where we only see people as their race or appearance, rather than as human beings deserving of equal rights and dignity. Racial profiling doesn't just affect the individual who is directly targeted. The ripple effect extends far beyond that person. It reaches deep into the heart of entire communities, dividing people and creating a system of distrust that can last for generations. In every instance of racial profiling, the damage spreads. What happens when an entire community is constantly monitored, questioned, and harassed for no reason other than how they look? What happens when people begin to feel like the very institutions that are meant to protect them are instead the ones that oppress them? The impact of racial profiling doesn't stop at the moment of interaction. It is a deeply ingrained trauma that continues to shape the daily lives of entire neighborhoods. It fractures a connection between marginalized communities and law enforcement, fostering a sense of alienation, fear, and distrust. This is not just a matter of individuals being treated unfairly. It's the tearing apart of entire communities, piece by piece. Families are the first to bear the brunt of racial profiling. Picture a mother who watches her son walk out the door with nothing but the expectation of coming back, only to be called hours later by the police, telling her that her child has been detained, simply for existing in a public space. The trauma of wrongful detentions, unwarranted arrests, and unexplained harassment is something that doesn't easily fade. It stays with families. It affects their relationships. It alters their sense of safety and security. People begin to live in constant fear, not just of the unknown, but of the institution that is meant to protect them. What happens when people feel betrayed by the very institutions they've been told are there to serve and protect? When a community can no longer trust law enforcement to do what is right, it breaks that fundamental bond of trust, the glue that holds communities together. Neighborhoods once thriving with solidarity and mutual care become fractured and suspicious. People start to see each other through the lens of fear. They worry not just for themselves, but for their children, their families, and their friends, always wondering if today will be the day they're next. The relationship between marginalized communities and law enforcement is no longer one of protection. It's one of fear, and sometimes even hatred. Now, let's take a closer look at how these rifts form, how racial profiling doesn't just change individual lives, but destroys communities from within. Take the story of Caleb, a man who was wrongfully detained simply for existing in a public space. He wasn't committing any crime. He wasn't acting suspiciously. But his life was upended that day. He was followed by security, questioned without cause, and eventually detained for hours, all because of his race. Let's walk through what happened next, because it's more than just a loss of time. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. This moment marked the beginning of a cascade of losses for him. His job was threatened, and ultimately he lost it. His reputation was tarnished as the false suspicion surrounding him spread. And perhaps most painfully, his trust in the system was completely shattered. The emotional toll of racial profiling is immeasurable. It's not just about the physical and material consequences, though those are real. It's the psychological burden that stays long after the incident. For the individual who's been targeted, It's the constant anxiety of wondering when it might happen again. It's the loss of self-esteem that comes from being made to feel like a threat, even when you're just living your life. It's the damage to your sense of safety and your trust in the very systems that are supposed to protect you. The emotional scars are long-lasting. Victims of racial profiling often carry baggage that affects their relationships, their confidence, and their mental health. It's like an invisible wound that never heals fully. The trauma of being treated unfairly by the system can follow someone for years, sometimes for a lifetime. The psychological toll of racial profiling also takes root in relationships. How can you trust others when you don't even trust the systems meant to protect you? It's a slow erosion of confidence, not just in yourself, but in the world around you. Relationships become strained, and the constant stress of living under suspicion impacts everything. Your ability to connect, to feel safe, to move through the world with a sense of peace. And it's not just the victims who feel this. The trauma spreads to families, friends, and entire communities, creating a culture of fear that holds us all back. Racial profiling is not a problem isolated to one person, one family, or one community. It is a societal issue, a wound in the fabric of society that gets worse with every person unjustly targeted. It's a divide that continues to grow, eroding our sense of trust and justice, until it becomes so normalized that we no longer recognize the damage it does. The emotional scars are far-reaching. They hurt individuals, families, communities, and the very fabric of our society. And yet, too many people still believe that racial profiling is a problem for only the victims. But the truth is, this affects us all. We cannot allow this injustice to continue. Together, we can break the cycle. Together, we can heal these divisions and build a future where everyone is treated fairly, with dignity and with respect. To understand why racial profiling persists, we must trace its roots deep into the history of the United States. Racial profiling is not just a modern-day issue. It is a legacy that has evolved over centuries, shaped by the country's historical treatment of marginalized groups. Its origins are tied to a time when society was built on the assumption that certain races were inferior and therefore needed to be controlled. The practice of racial profiling stretches back to the early days of slavery, a time when people of African descent were stripped of their rights, dignity, and freedom. But even after the abolition of slavery, the laws and systems that allowed for such injustice didn't simply disappear. Instead, they adapted, evolving into new forms of discrimination and control. The systematic targeting of people based on their race became institutionalized through Jim Crow laws and later, the war on drugs, policies that disproportionately affected Black and Latino communities. The practices that began during slavery and segregation laid the foundation for what we see today. From racially discriminatory policing to disparate sentencing in the justice system, racial profiling has been passed down through the generations, woven into the very fabric of American institutions. The roots of racial profiling run deep, but the problem is not confined to history. These discriminatory practices have not only persisted, they become systemic. Today, racial profiling is perpetuated by the very institutions meant to maintain justice and order in society. The police force, the court system, and even schools are all institutions built on a foundation of racial bias, whether intentional or not. Let's break this down. At the heart of the police force is the idea that law enforcement needs to maintain control and order, especially in marginalized communities. But historically, this has meant disproportionately targeting people of color. Officers are often trained to view people of color as threats based on their race rather than their actions. These biases become entrenched in law enforcement culture and influence the way officers engage with certain communities. But it doesn't stop with the police. The court system also plays a critical role in perpetuating racial profiling. Studies have shown that Black and Latino defendants are more likely to be arrested, convicted, and sentenced to longer prison terms than their white counterparts, even for the same crimes. These disparities are not simply the result of individual prejudices. They are built into the very policies that govern our justice system. Even schools are not immune. The school-to-prison pipeline disproportionately affects students of color, particularly Black students, who are more likely to be suspended, expelled, or arrested for minor infractions. School resource officers often treat these children like criminals, leading to their early involvement with the criminal justice system. Racial profiling in schools reinforces the idea that these children are predisposed to criminality, further perpetuating the cycle of discrimination. But institutional racism doesn't end with policing or education. It also feeds into the cultural landscape. The media plays a significant role in perpetuating the stereotypes that fuel racial profiling. From TV shows to news broadcasts, cultural portrayals of race often cast people of color in roles that reinforce harmful stereotypes. Consider how often the media presents black men as violent criminals or Latino men as gang members. These portrayals reinforce the idea that these groups of people are inherently dangerous and suspicious. They create a societal narrative that sees people of color through a lens of danger, criminality, and suspicion, regardless of their actual behavior. In films and television, characters of color are often shown in crime-ridden neighborhoods or in confrontations with police. These portrayals create a distorted picture of reality, a picture that perpetuates the idea that people of color are more likely to commit crimes. This, in turn, justifies racial profiling, making it seem like a necessary tool for protecting society. The news media further compounds this problem by sensationalizing crime stories involving people of color. When a crime is committed by someone who fits the stereotype of being a black or Latino individual, the media often makes the race of the suspect a key part of the story, further embedding these stereotypes in the public consciousness. This constant reinforcement of negative stereotypes builds a societal framework in which racial profiling becomes acceptable, even expected. This cultural reinforcement, alongside the systemic issues embedded in our institutions, explains why racial profiling continues to thrive. But it's important to remember, racial profiling doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is part of a larger culture of systemic racism that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. The danger of this ongoing cycle is that too many people begin to believe it's normal. They begin to see racial profiling not as an injustice, but as an inevitable consequence of our society. They begin to justify these actions, thinking it's a small price to pay for safety and order. But the truth is, racial profiling isn't about justice. It's about fear. Fear of people who are seen as different. Fear of the unknown. Fear of change. As a result, racial profiling continues to thrive. It continues to harm individuals, families, and communities. And most tragically, it continues to poison the very foundation of trust and justice that should exist in a fair society. While the problem of racial profiling is deeply rooted in the fabric of our society, it's important to recognize that change is possible. The fight for racial justice, for an end to racial profiling, and for equality is not a hopeless one. Every day, people, ordinary citizens, community leaders, and organizations are working tirelessly to create a more just and equitable society for everyone. The journey to ending racial profiling may be long, but we are not alone in this fight. There are countless organizations that have been standing at the forefront of this battle for years, demanding reforms and advocating for the changes that are needed. These organizations are focused on tackling systemic racism and pushing for accountability at every level, from the police force to courts. Take the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. For example, this organization has been fighting for civil rights and liberties for more than 100 years. They are champions of justice, actively challenging laws that allow racial profiling and advocating for greater transparency and accountability in law enforcement. The ACLU works on the front lines, not just in courtrooms, but in the streets, demanding that racial profiling, police brutality, and discriminatory policies be addressed head-on. Similarly, Color of Change is an advocacy group that has been pushing for racial justice and police reform across the United States. Through grassroots organizing, they are building a powerful movement that demands an end to racial profiling and police violence. Color of Change fights to hold public officials accountable and bring attention to the systemic inequalities that disproportionately affect communities of color. Then there's Campaign Zero, an organization focused on policy reforms that will hold police officers accountable for misconduct and end practices like racial profiling. Campaign Zero advocates for measures like the implementation of body cameras, community policing, and data transparency in police interactions to ensure that police actions are transparent and accountable to the people they serve. These organizations, and many others, are doing critical work, but their efforts cannot succeed without the support of each one of us. We all have a role to play in this fight, and together, we can make real change. The battle against racial profiling isn't solely for activists and organizations. It's a fight that we all must be a part of. It's a fight for justice, equality, and a future where no one is unfairly targeted or treated as a suspect because of their race. So what can you do? How can you make a difference? It starts with awareness, educating yourself about the realities of racial profiling and spreading that knowledge to others. Whether it's talking to your family, friends, or colleagues, every conversation helps shift perceptions and challenge the misconceptions that allow racial profiling to persist. But awareness alone isn't enough. We need action. Support the organizations that are already fighting for change. Whether it's donating, volunteering, or raising funds, your contribution helps these groups continue their important work. Even something as simple as signing a petition or sharing a video can help build momentum for larger systemic changes. But the most powerful tool we have is our vote. Voting is not just about electing the right officials. It's about putting people in office who will fight for racial justice and hold law enforcement accountable. When we vote for representatives who prioritize equality, who understand the need for reform, and who are committed to changing the system, we are taking one of the most concrete steps toward ending racial profiling. Voting isn't just a civic duty. It's a chance to shape the future. By electing progressive lawmakers, we can influence policy decisions that will lead to systemic change. Whether it's pushing for legislation that mandates body cameras on all police officers or advocating for reforms to reduce racial disparities in policing, voting is a powerful way to ensure that racial profiling becomes a thing of the past. In addition to voting, engaging in local activism is essential. Attend city council meetings. Speak out at school board meetings. Get involved with local organizations that are demanding justice. Engage with your community to push for the changes you want to see. If you're passionate about police reform, help organize protests or work to get people to polls. Engage with others to advocate for policy changes that end racial profiling and promote fair treatment for all. Together, these actions can lead to real, lasting change. When we unite, when we demand justice and stand in solidarity, we create a movement that cannot be ignored. Change is never easy, but it is always possible when we all work together. Whether you are fighting for police accountability, criminal justice reform, or the protection of civil liberties, we can make a difference. The fight for racial justice is long, but it is a fight worth fighting. And we must continue to work toward a future where racial profiling is a thing of the past and where equality and justice are accessible to everyone. We've covered a lot of ground today, talking about the pain of racial profiling, its far-reaching effects, and the critical importance of standing together to fight against this injustice. But here's the truth. The work doesn't stop here. Change doesn't happen just because we've discussed the problem. It happens when people like you get involved, take action, and push for something better. And now it's your turn. We want to hear from you. Your thoughts, your experiences, your ideas for how we can make a difference. We know that fighting racial profiling is not easy, and it's not something that can be fixed overnight. But we must keep talking about it. We must keep fighting for it. And we must act now. Because the longer we remain silent, the longer these injustices continue. So, what are your thoughts on the fight against racial profiling? What changes do you think need to be made in your community to stop it? How can we all come together to build a world where racial profiling is no longer tolerated? We want to hear from you in the comments below. The conversation doesn't end with this video. It's just beginning. Your voice matters. Your action matters. But change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when we all engage, when we share our thoughts, when we take what we've learned and turn it into action. The more people understand the impact of racial profiling, the more momentum we create to drive real change. And you can be a part of that. If this video resonated with you, if it sparked something inside you, we encourage you to share it. Share it with your friends. Share it with your family. Share it with anyone who needs to hear this message. The more people we can reach, the closer we get to making a lasting impact. By sharing this video, you're helping to spread awareness, spark more conversations, and amplify the call for racial justice. You can share it directly on social media, send it to friends via messages, or tag others in the comments. Every share increases a chance that this message will reach someone who needs to hear it. someone who might be moved to act, or someone who didn't realize how crucial this issue really is. The fight against racial profiling isn't over. It will take all of us working together to create a world where racial profiling no longer exists. But we can make a difference. We are making a difference. One conversation, one action, one share at a time. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We have much more content coming your way on racial equality, justice, and the ongoing fight for social change. When you subscribe, you're not just staying up to date with our videos. You're joining a community of people who care deeply about these issues, who are actively seeking to make a difference, and who are ready to continue this journey toward a more just world. By subscribing, you'll receive notifications when we release new videos that explore topics like racial justice, the fight for police reform, and stories that will continue to shed light on these important issues. We'll continue to provide you with the information and tools you need to understand, advocate for, and be a part of this movement. This is just the beginning. The fight for equality, for justice, and for an end to racial profiling is ongoing. But together, we can make a difference. Together, we can stand for justice. Together, we can end racial profiling. Thanks for watching.